then these kids would go off to college and they would start wilding out.
Yeah.
And they were partying and it was like, and I remember thinking constantly, what happened? How did these kids lose their faith? And there's a lot of conversation like that. And I remember one day just talking with someone and realized that, if these kids, if their idols in their heart, the things that they were worshiping was approval. Well, when you're in youth group, you get approval from your youth pastor by being a good Christian kid. You get approval from your parents by acting right and saying the right things and doing the right thing. And when you go away to college, guess what? That's not how you get approval anymore. You get approval by doing different things. And so I realized it's possible that my whole youth ministry, if it was only about behavior modification, that I changed their behavior, but I never changed their heart. And unless we address the idols of our heart and show them how Jesus is better, we may change behavior for the temporary, but we're not going to really see heart transformation.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Vitals for Youth Ministry podcast, the resource of Lead the Generation. We're so glad you joined us today, whether you're listening on Apple or Spotify or whether you're watching on YouTube. We're just glad you're with us. My name is Aaron. I'm one of the co-hosts for the podcast. I'm the director of Lead the Generation, and I'm joined by this incredible dude right here.
Wow, that's a good intro. Yeah, I'm Caleb. I'm the youth pastor at Alice Park Church, and I've been doing that for about 4 years now.
Yeah. So excited for this podcast, and so excited for you to be with us. It's going to be great. I think the dog's going to be a part of the show today too. So welcome, buddy. We're glad you're with us. He's not the special guest. The real guest we have today, right here, this guy, Jared Berry, who is the Next Gen Director for the New York Ministry Network of the Assemblies of God. Jared, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, thanks, guys. So glad to be with you. Excited to get to hang out and chat.
Yeah. We're excited you're with us. So this is the very first episode.
The inaugural episode.
This is it. And so, Jared, we're excited you're with us, but also because you've been a part of the whole development of Vitals for Youth Ministry. You spoke into it in many ways, and then you're actually in some of the resources, training videos. If you're listening or watching and you don't know exactly what we're talking about, go to leadthegeneration.com. Click on the Vitals link, and you're going to see this incredible resource that is 100% free. All the videos, all the notes to train you as a youth pastor, as a youth leader, whether you are vocational, whether you're volunteer, use it for training your leaders, all that stuff. And I know you're using it in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. This is kind of the extended conversation from those videos, the deep dive. And so we got time to relax, to chill. And so, Jared, because of that, we got youth pastors watching. I feel like you can't be in youth ministry and not have a stupid, crazy youth group story. And so just to get things moving.
Your go-to youth pastor story,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, what's like if you're sitting at a lunch table with all the youth pastors and you got to one them up, it's like, what's the story that you're sharing?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks guys for having me. I'm super excited about this and very pumped about Vitals. I love what your heart is, what you're doing and putting together. I think it's essential, and I'm excited to be a part of it. So yeah, a lot of stories in youth ministry, and especially, actually, Aaron mentioned this before. I realize I'm coming up on close to 20 years of doing youth ministry, which is cool.
Let's go.
So what's wild
and you
about
still
that,
look good. Let's just say that right there. Like you're holding it together.
Yeah. Any gray hairs under the hat yet from all the years of that?
I mean, there may be a few. I'm still carrying a little holiday weight, so I apologize for that. But yeah.
Wait, what holiday are you talking about?
Christmas is from like 6 years ago.
Okay,
I got it.
But there's a story that comes to mind. Actually, involves my wife in our first church that we ever were at, and her and I were kind of like trying to prank each other, right? And I had bought for youth ministry a bunch of these little stink bombs. Do you guys remember? They came in like glass bottles. Do you remember those?
Oh, I don't think I know this.
Oh, you're too young. I remember this is from my era.
Can I get an Amazon link? Can we send an Amazon link after this? Yeah.
I don't know if they still make them, but they were, tiny little glass vial filled with Satan's sweat. I don't know what it was, but if you crack that thing, it was horrible smell. Absolutely horrible. And I had bought a bunch for some youth ministry stuff, some fun, just like prank stuff that we were going to mess around with. And she had found them in my office. And so one day, it was a Sunday morning, we were in church, and we were part of, the church was like kind of a conservative, maybe a little more old school church. And I'm down on the front row with the lead pastor. Without me realizing, she grabs my keys to my office, sneaks out of the service, goes upstairs, unlocks the office, grabs them, and she decided it would be hilarious to set one off in my office. Because in her mind, the smell was just going to stay in the office. And then when I went in there, I'd be like, oh, what is that? You know? So she cracks one, doesn't notice anything, and decides, I'm going to crack a couple more.
No.
She breaks out 5 of them in my office, shuts the door, heads back downstairs. Well, service is going on, and all of a sudden, you start to smell a smell lofting into the sanctuary. And people are going, what is that? Oh my goodness. Service lets out, and at this point, it's hit the air ducts. And so the AC is pushing this smell throughout the entire
this is
floor.
amazing.
I mean, it smells like absolute rotten eggs. She comes up to me, panicked. I can't believe this. I did this. I set them off. She's admitting it to me.
Wow.
What do I do? And I, at this point, I'm kind of internally laughing, but I'm like, now I'm going to get you. So I was like, this is serious. You got to go tell the lead pastor. You got to apologize. We're probably going to get fired. You know, so she was all worked up. She had to apologize to the lead pastor. And thankfully he was okay with it because he was an ex-youth pastor. So he kind of knew, knew what it meant. But people, they didn't know what happened. And it was, it was hilarious, man.
Wow. See, like, Caleb, I hope for your benefit, you realize, like, you don't want an Amazon link. You don't want to mess with this at all.
Probably
This
not.
is a bad era of youth ministry we're talking about here.
Yes. Yeah.
That's insane. Oh my gosh. I love the free flowing conviction of that. She just came to you and was like, here's what I did. It's like, oh, that's hilarious. Oh my gosh.
The Lord dealt with her. She got
The Lord dealt with
her.
I love that your youth ministry story isn't even about a student. It's about your own wife too. That's what's great.
Yeah.
Usually it's like this dumb middle schooler or this is this. It's like, no, my wife cracked some stink
My
bombs
story
in my
is about
office.
how I almost got fired as a youth pastor.
Exactly. Yeah, I have plenty of those for sure. So
we all do. Let's be honest. We all have those moments.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I was such a anti-prank youth pastor. Because I just couldn't handle it. I was bad at a lot of stuff, but one thing I was good at was recognizing what was going to trigger me in a not good way, and pranks were like on that list. And so I'm like hardcore, like no pranks at all, because I just knew, like, if you get me, I'm not going to be able to handle it, and then it's going to be on. Got it.
You were afraid of the revenge prank.
I was afraid of myself, basically.
Yeah. Of the lengths to which you would go.
Yes. This man, no emotional control at this moment in his life. Like, okay, it's on now, and I will win. The competitive side of me would kick in, but
that happened when I was growing up in youth ministry. We had one of my friends pranked our youth pastor, which was actually my brother, and he brought him up during a service and played a huge prank video in front of everybody. It's like youth pastor get back mode. Yeah, not
Engage.
good. You did a good job restraining yourself, Aaron, because it was like, I can't believe this is
there
happening.
was no restraint. It was total denial. Like, we're just not going there whatsoever. But that's amazing. So let's jump into a conversation about vitals. And again, for those of you that are just kind of tuning in and maybe you're not incredibly familiar with what Vitals for Youth Ministry is, one of the ways we would describe Vitals is we would say that it's a biblical framework that we can use to help structure our youth ministry around the purpose or the mission of discipleship, right? We would all agree as youth pastors, that's the goal. We want to disciple young people, right? Now, I don't think anyone would, at least not verbally, say, I don't, why are you doing youth ministry? But sometimes we struggle to build youth ministries or structure youth ministries around that being the primary focus. And so the heart of Vitals is to really come alongside of you as a youth pastor, again, whether you are full-time vocational youth pastor, maybe in a mid-size or large-size church, or whether you're a volunteer leader and, running a handful of kids, the goal is still the same. It's discipleship. And so the heart of Vitals is to really give you that framework, or to really give you that structure. So Jared, let's just jump in here, and Caleb and I are just going to ask you some questions and just kind of, have a conversation with you about Vitals and more specifically about like why we need a framework, right, for our youth ministry. So let's start there. So why would you say youth pastors need a biblical framework that focuses on discipleship in their youth ministry? Specifically, like, let's unpack the idea of like, why do I need a framework? Or another word you could use is like philosophy. Why do I really have to have like the foundation of a biblical philosophy in my youth ministry?
Yeah, I think it's so important because, when we get into youth ministry, I think a lot of us love teenagers, we love Jesus, and we kind of have an idea of what we think we should do or what we think youth ministry looks like. And the longer that you do ministry, oftentimes you realize all the mistakes that you make, all you think back and go, man, if I could have done it differently, I'd do this, I would do that. And having a kind of a guiding philosophy that is like the bumpers or guardrails, but also the helpful framework for us to make decisions about what really matters. And that could be financially, that could be how we spend time, that could be how we structure our services, or whether or not we do small groups, or all of those things. There's all these decisions to be made, and having a framework that helps us be informed when we make those decisions is so important, or vital, if you will, that I would say it's one of the most important things that we need. Because otherwise, here's what happened, and I can relate to this for some time in my youth ministry, is years can go by and we kind of think we're doing a good job, or we hope we're doing a good job, but then we look at the fruit and go, man, I don't know if I was really making a difference long term. Sure, I was loving kids, and God uses everything, but when you have a helpful framework to kind of measure and judge and evaluate the things that we're doing, what I found is your fruit can increase so much more, and it can help you not only know what to do, but also what not to do.
Yeah, absolutely. That emotion is so real, of like, I feel like it's the longer you're in it, it's like, am I doing the right, am I doing the right stuff? And I think as you were talking, I was thinking, what do you think youth pastors tend to get the most tripped up on in this conversation of philosophy? Maybe even, what do you feel like, you said you wish you would have done things differently. What do you think you found yourself getting held up on, that you think you wish you would have changed? Or you see in the trends of youth ministry you think you wish would change?
Yeah, the two things that I missed the most when I did youth ministry was, number one, my theology. So I did not have a gospel-centered theology. A lot of my teaching, preaching focus was about behavior modification. How do I get kids to look more like Christians, to behave better, versus how do I get students to love Jesus more? And so that was one big area where I really missed it for a long time. And that shift, being a gospel-centered youth ministry, a Christ-centered youth ministry, was pivotal. And then the second one was having a discipleship strategy and understanding that we're here ultimately to make disciples that are lifelong followers of Jesus. And nothing else matters, right? So everything we do and in a discipleship strategy, all the time that we spent, the decisions we make, all of that should be filtered through, is this part of my strategy to move kids from unbelief in the gospel to full belief in the gospel in every area of their life? And I don't think I realized that, recognized that. And as I did, the last thing that I'll say, which I realize is, and I wish young leaders would grasp this more, is we often overestimate what we can accomplish in the short term, and we underestimate what we can accomplish in the long term, or what God can accomplish, through us and through our works. And so I just remember the amount of anxiety and pressure and weight that I would put on myself each like Wednesday night over the sermon. And like this one's going to be it. This is going to be the game changer. But I often underestimated what it would look like if I stayed consistent in those kids' lives for 4 years. And so I think that's another, like, those are probably the three biggest mistakes that I would make, that if I went back, I would try to tweak and adjust.
Your answer is so interesting to me. I want to unpack it a little bit more and camp on it a little bit. Because again, like I mentioned earlier, I don't think any youth pastor would ever verbally say, "Oh, discipleship, that's not really that important for us." Right? We would all, we would all be like, "No, absolutely. That's the Great Commission. Go and make disciples." Right? And in the same way, I think that it's remarkable, Jared, for you to reflect back and say, "Man, I don't think that we were as gospel central or gospel fluent as what, maybe I thought we were.
Absolutely.
Most youth pastors would not assess their current youth ministry or maybe their teaching and preaching and say, yeah, I don't really talk about the gospel there.
Yeah.
And that's for those of you that are interested in some of the Vitals resources, there's actually a couple of videos, Jared, that you did for us that really unpack gospel fluency. How do we build and structure our sermons and preaching? I'm thinking about one video in particular that you and I did, Jared. It's like how do we preach for biblical literacy? And so there's some good content there. But unpack that journey for us a little bit, Jared. What happened in your life or in your ministry that opened your eyes to that pitfall where you're like, man, I'm not gospel fluent or gospel focused enough in my preaching and teaching?
Yeah, for me, I was probably 5 years into being a full-time youth pastor when I kind of had this slow journey of being exposed to some authors and writers. Probably the biggest one was Tim Keller, was a massive influence, and I started listening to his sermons, and what I realized was that, and this is a major temptation in youth ministry, because we have parents that will bring their teenagers to us, and basically what they're saying is, fix my kid.
Mm-hmm.
They're doing drugs, they're watching porn, they're not respectful, and their hope is that by being in your youth ministry, you are going to turn their behavior around.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the philosophy that I bought into, which is, here's what a Christian likes. How do I get these kids to look more like that with the stuff that they watch, the music they listen to, whatever the behavior is? And so as I would teach and preach the Bible, I would teach and preach them as kind of stories of morality that we would try to help the students learn. Here's what it looks like. And so kind of a classic example would be the story of David and Goliath, right? And you could preach that story, and I would preach it as, hey, let's all go be like David, right? Let's attack our giants. What are the giants in your life? You got to attack the giants and blah, blah, blah. But the true point of that story is that we're not David, we are the Israelites. David is actually pointing us to Jesus. So the hero of the story is not David, it's Jesus. And so it's not that there's not attributes that David has that are not admirable, but when I teach and preach that story now, what I'm showing them is, don't you see that even in our good behavior, we are all sinful and broken. We are all, we are the Israelites. We are afraid, and what we need ultimately is a savior. We need someone to be our substitute, which is what David was. Now, because of that, because of the beauty of who Jesus is and how he transforms our heart for how much he loves us and stood in our place, now we can live for him. And so it's a very different message, because one is, go do your best, rah, rah, we can do it, try hard, be like David. And the other is, don't you see what Jesus did on your behalf? Now, out of your overwhelming love for him, let's live for him on his behalf. And so one motivation is I'm going to will myself to this. And the other motivation is a deep love for Christ. And so that's just one example of how you would teach and preach the Bible, but those examples are all over the place. And so that was really transformative for me. And what I found was, this was the real kicker, and then I'll hand it to you guys. But I realized for years and years and years, I had students who were the one or two kids in youth ministry that made you feel like you weren't an absolute failure, They were the ones raising their hands in worship. They were going on all the trips. You're like, all right, yeah, finally I got it. I'm doing okay. And then these kids would go off to college and they would start wilding out. Yeah. And they were partying, and it was like, and I remember thinking constantly, what happened? How did these kids lose their faith? And there's a lot of conversation like that. And I remember one day just talking with someone and realized that, if these kids, if their idols in their heart, the things that they were worshiping was approval. Well, when you're in a youth group, you get approval from your youth pastor by being a good Christian kid. You get approval from your parents by acting right and saying the right things and doing the right things. And when you go away to college, guess what? That's not how you get approval anymore. You get approval by doing different things. And so I realized it's possible that my whole youth ministry, if it was only about behavior modification, that I changed their behavior, but I never changed their heart. Wow. And unless we address the idols of our heart and show them how Jesus is better, we may change behavior for the temporary, but we're not going to really see heart transformation. And that was a massive eye opener for me, as to even the good kids are still worshiping the same idols that the bad kids are. It may manifest differently, but if we don't address those idols, if we don't get to the heart of the issue and show them how Jesus is better, we're wasting our time.
Yeah.
So Caleb, let me flip that to you real quick, because you
First
mentioned.
up, I'll say this is so good and even convicting as a youth pastor, because a lot of this stuff, I just feel a lot of those same things.
Well, that's what I wanted
I'm
to
sure
ask
a lot
you
of
about,
youth pastors do too.
you're right at the beginning of your journey. You're like 4 years in.
Yep.
And so as you're unpacking that, I think it would be helpful for those that are watching and listening, is to, like, you're in youth ministry, you're doing it. How does all that hit you? How are you processing that?
Yeah, I'll say the behavior modification thing is so, because there's a fine line, right? I want students to be transformed by the Word of God, and the Word of God through repentance should become a thing that transforms my behavior.
Mm-hmm.
But it's easy, like you're saying, to get so focused on the fruit behavior that I want you to change, and even making the association between, this is why students go off to college, and often they end up falling off because they're kind of seeking the approval of, what they got from me or other youth leaders for years. So I'm like, wow, it is like really challenging for me. I would say, like, I think for me, I'm thinking, okay, because there is that fine line of, like, I want students to be transformed, and there is, when in Jesus' teaching, he has some stuff that's like, hey, don't live like this, don't do this, or do this. So what was, like, the guiding, as you're preparing for sermons, practically, what's kind of a guiding philosophy that helps you stay gospel centered and not get so trapped in the, like, almost like fruit based teaching of, like, I want to see this result in their life?
Yeah. And you bring up a great point, which is that there is really practical, helpful teaching in Scripture. Like, it is meant, there's wisdom, right? I mean, the book of Psalms and so much of in the Old Testament has such wisdom for us, right? But for me, what helps, and I think what transformed it for me, is realizing that at the end of the day, what transforms our heart is not a fear of hell. It's not being scared to not make it. I think it was Keller who said, no one's in heaven because they're scared of hell.
Mm-hmm.
We're in heaven because we love Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And what ultimately transforms our heart is falling in love with Christ. And so if you want real behavior change, it's not going to be because you're scared that God will punish you if you don't. And I think we can all relate to that. I mean, that was my youth group experience growing up. I remember having the thoughts, and I still talk to students now, where it's like, if I die while I'm sinning, or if I'm listening to a secular song when I get in a heart, I'm going to go to hell, And a lot of my behavior and trying to be good was trying to earn my salvation because I was scared. I was scared of being punished.
Yeah.
But the reality is, what really changes hearts is a love for Christ. And when you realize how beautiful he is, when you realize that he's better, you will willingly lay down other things because you understand how meaningless they are compared to what he is. So I'll use pornography as an example. There's wisdom in saying, hey, you're struggling with porn, student. Yeah, you shouldn't have your phone with you in times of temptation.
Yeah.
Right? You shouldn't have a computer near you or an iPad or whatever. That's wise, and we should do that. But what we all should do is to say, what's the heart idol behind the temptation of porn? Is it approval? Are you fantasizing in that moment that you're that person and that you're having the approval of the women that you're watching, right? If we don't do both of those things, if we don't get to the heart idol, we may help them in the temporary, but we're not helping them in the long term. And so that was what helped me, is just reminding myself, if I'm not helping them in my sermon and teaching love Jesus more, I'm shortchanging them in the long term.
Yeah.
I think it's a Keller quote too. He's getting a lot of shout outs today.
Dude, he is. I think I have a Tim Keller quote too, but I'm not sure.
So, but I think I heard him say once, we become what we behold.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what I hear you saying, Jared, when you're talking about, like, the goal is to get students to just absolutely fall in love with Jesus. And then their passion for Christ is what brings about transformation in their life. let's unpack this from a slightly different perspective now. So we talk about vitals for youth ministry, 5 vitals, biblical truth, spiritual transformation. That's a lot of what we're talking about right now, those two. We would also say healthy community, missional living, leadership development. Those are the 5 vitals. We want to structure our youth ministry around that, right? The trap that I think I fell into as a youth pastor, when I'm listening to you speak, Jared, about the journey you went through, I would take students to, for instance, camp or a weekend retreat, a convention, something like that. They'd have this amazing spiritual experience, spiritual transformation, right? And so then what I thought as a youth pastor was what my kids just experienced at camp or at this special event I went to. I need to build my youth ministry so that it looks like that, so that kids get that every single week. That was what I thought. I'm like, what if what if my youth ministry felt like camp every single week? And so I remember like for years, like I'm just investing all my time, all my effort, whatever little budget money we had. It was all about like, we're trying to like build this program. And that for me, that was one of my big pitfalls, was like this idea of like, if kids are really going to grow, they need to be in that kind of environment on a regular basis. I think now, years later, I can zoom out and I can be like, wow, there's such transformative value in taking your kids to those events and to, those experiences. And we need that. And that is a big part of the quote unquote discipleship recipe if I'm looking at my youth ministry from an annual perspective. But I probably should have my local church youth ministry structured slightly different.
Yeah.
Right. So unpack that from your perspective, Jared, because you're in the unique position of like, you've been a youth pastor for years, but then you also help organize and run a lot of those events that we fully believe in. How do you see all of those things working together? Like the local church youth ministry focus of something like Vitals, along with great events and great spiritual experiences that you would find like in a camp.
Yeah, that's a great kind of a great question and great point that I think you're making. And I was the same way, Aaron, for a long time. It was kind of the if you build it, they will come mentality.
Yeah.
If I can be a better preacher and we can have a killer band and we can make it look just right, we'll fill it up. And I do think that's a massive lie and a mistake. So I love it. Though here's how I view these events is events are great. They're important. They're necessary as an accent to a disciple-making environment.
Oh, I like that. Mm-hmm. I like that phrase, an accent to it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you in your local youth ministry are making disciples on a regular basis, which by the way is not always super fun and sexy and like it's less appealing than the events because oftentimes it doesn't feel like you've got these mountaintop moments. It's more of a grind.
Yeah. That's the trap. That's the trap. It doesn't feel as good. I'll let you keep going on, but yeah.
No, absolutely. So if you have that foundation and that disciple making environment, events are really great because they provide some kind of they're kind of like a spark to use like a fire analogy, right? They're like a spark to the fire that you have been building all along. So you're putting the kindling on, you're cutting the wood, you're building it day in and day out, week in and week out. And then there's these opportunities that are kind of spark moments. And what is happening is sometimes we think, oh, that's the key, to your point, right? The key is that. But no. The key was you building the fire to begin with, you getting everything ready. Yeah. And then God kind of uses these spark moments, which are usually typically outside of their comfort zone. It's a little something different than they're used to. And there's different opportunities, and God uses those moments to do something really cool. But I think it's important for youth leaders to remind themselves, without the work that you're doing, that would not happen.
Yeah.
It's those are spark moments, but you're building that foundation of that fire that is ultimately going to sustain them in the long term. And so that's kind of how I think about it. I think they're both really important, but without the discipleship strategy to begin with, those moments become way less meaningful and effective.
What's that look like for you in your youth ministry?
I was just going to say that, like what I have noticed. So Aaron is actually like in my ear a lot about like, don't just be about the program. And
we've
so I
talked
feel
about
like,
this issue a lot.
Yes,
You and I, we've talked
feel
because
like,
you're at a church that historically has been very event structured for youth ministry.
in very excellence, like it's a big value.
And you've been trying to like balance out all of that.
And so even like hearing your stories, I'm like, there's still that temptation to want to build something that feels really good, because it feels good. It feels good to have something that feels quality. But also like when it's like, I'm just waiting for the next retreat, and it's like, I'm just kind of building for the next camp. What happens is, in the students, they start to like say that stuff too, where it's like, yeah, I'm going through this really hard time, but I know camp is coming up. So once I get to camp, it's going to be good. And it's like, I'm sitting there like, dude, what? Like, no, like we could be in the smallest room and worship God together, and you'll experience, him to a way higher degree. And so it doesn't have to be just this emotional worship moment or this high energy, whatever. That's been a real struggle. Is almost like the kids can get programmed to think the best parts are the highest emotional parts of camp, which really, like, it's man, yeah, this is something I've been honestly stewing on a lot of. Like, following Jesus isn't just experiencing him in the highs, but it's about like truly saying, I want to, submit to him and what he has for my life. And that can't just come through those camp highs. Yeah. So that's been a real struggle for me.
Well, we can fall into the trap where we're unintentionally teaching students to that their faith and that growth in their faith is when they're longing for the next big spiritual event, the next big, whatever it is, program event or whatnot, rather than teaching that discipleship is really this process of like, each and every day of my life, I'm choosing faithfulness to God and worship to God over, the idols in my heart and all these things that we're talking about.
Yeah.
And I don't think we do that intentionally as youth pastors. I think we just naturally, it's easy for us to fall into that trap of events are fun, lots of energy, lots of feel-good moments for students and for us as leaders. You get to see spiritual breakthrough, genuine spiritual breakthrough take place in the lives of students, and you're like, that's it. I want that, and I just want that all the time, right? And we fall very unintentionally into this trap or into this thought process as a youth pastor of that's what I'm building right there.
Yeah.
Rather than I'm trying to structure a youth ministry around a core set of, in this case, we'll use the word vitals because that's what we're talking about, a core set of vitals, a framework, a biblical philosophy that's going to help me produce disciples that are going to live long term.
Yeah.
Right. And Jared, you had talked about that. Like that became like one of the, and I had the same experience where it's like you youth pastor long enough in the same place with the same group of students, and you'll know the test of your fruit is not even really what happens when students are in your youth ministry. It's what happens when they're outside youth ministry. Right.
I would just, if I could just add something to that too. Like, I think what you just said, Aaron, is so important, because I think in our current generation that we're trying to reach, their primary idol is comfort.
Yeah.
Which is an avoidance of pain or a pursuit of pleasure. So they're really wanting to either numb themselves or do whatever it takes to not be uncomfortable. And the problem is they're kind of emerged into youth ministry, this idea that if you don't feel something, then it's inauthentic and you shouldn't do it.
Yep.
Right. Like, oh, if you don't feel like doing your devotions and you're not super excited about it, then that's a problem and that's a hard issue and you're not being authentic. And so I remember hearing students say stuff like that, like, yeah, I don't want to do it. So I'm not going to do it because I don't want to do it if it's not genuine and authentic or whatever. And I'm thinking, dude, that's crazy. Like, most of life in our Christian walk is doing stuff we don't want to do.
True.
You know what I mean? If you only ever read your Bible when you absolutely were so excited about it, you would rarely read your Bible.
Yeah.
If you only went to work when you were super pumped about going to work, guess what? You'd be on the street. Like, as a parent, if you only did the things that you're supposed to do for your kids when you felt like it, you would rarely do it. I mean, that's the worst recipe for success in life in general, and certainly in our spiritual life. And so I think we got to get back to teaching kids what it means to be determined for the Lord, to grind for the Lord and say, it doesn't matter what I feel like doing, I'm going to do what he's called me to do. And often feelings come from discipline. And so that when our whole youth ministry is based on these mountaintop moments and these events, it's reinforcing what kids already think, which is I'll just wait for the good stuff and I'll avoid any of the uncomfortable parts.
And what's crazy is when they have a bad camp experience,
then it works the opposite.
When it's like, I don't even know if I believe anymore.
Yeah.
It's like, oh man.
Yeah.
So yeah, exactly. It shapes that whole perspective for that.
And so just to be really clear, what I want to make sure that you hear and that you don't hear I want you to hear there's great value and there's great breakthrough in the camp.
Absolutely.
The events, all these things we're talking about.
Absolutely.
So I want you to hear that. What I don't want you to hear, or I think I got confused. I don't know what I'm trying to say right now. But
you don't want them to think camp is bad. You want them to think.
Yeah, I'm not saying get rid of all that.
Yeah.
I want everyone to see how it fits into a healthy framework of like, okay, here's what local church youth ministry looks like, and here's what I'm focused on as a youth pastor or youth leader.
Yeah.
And here's how, to use, Jared, your phrase, here's how the camp type experiences accent or augment and are a part of my overall annual discipleship strategy.
Yeah. I love calling it an accent. That's so great. So for the youth pastors who are like, I want to do this, I just don't know where to start, where would you point them, Jared? Like, what would be the first things they should start to focus on if they feel like they've become a mountaintop highs and lows focused on the retreat kind of youth ministry?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's one of the things I love about what you guys are doing with Vitals is I think it's so helpful and important and just so necessary for when we kind of get stuck to help give us some ideas, some fresh perspectives. So obviously, if you're listening to this, I would encourage you to really lean into that resource. But for me, if you were saying, what's my discipleship strategy? Well, the first thing you got to do is define what does a disciple look like? If you're trying to make a disciple, we kind of got to know, right? And so if I were you, I would, as simple as possible, lay out and say, here's what I think a disciple looks like. Here's what I would like to see. And then you start to build a strategy from step 0 to step whatever, 3, 4, 5. Here's how we're going to get there. And one of the books that was really helpful for me, I think, was called Simple Youth Ministry or Simple Church. And they really lean into the idea of assess everything you're doing. So if you meeting on Wednesday nights and Friday nights and you have an event and look at everything you're doing and say, how does this fit into my strategy? Mm-hmm. And is there anything I'm doing that is a duplicating effort? So if everything I do is a large group event, and there's no small group element, there's no one-on-one element, then you need to change some of the stuff that you're doing. And you want everything that you do to be building towards that goal of making a disciple. And so if a student comes through our ministry, obviously it's God who changes their heart, but our hope is as they come through, they're going to fall more and more in love with Jesus. They're going to look more and more like Christ. And so that's where I would say is to start, is to really define a disciple and then assess everything we're doing and say, does this help us reach that outcome?
And there's a couple videos that I'll reference in the Vitals for Youth Ministry library that I think are exactly what Jared's saying here that can be helpful to you as well. There's one called A Biblical Framework for Vitals, and it really just kind of walks you through where do you find the 5 vitals in the book of Acts, right? And so we have like this biblical framework of like, this is why we're doing what we're doing. And then there's some other videos, how to build your youth ministry around the vitals, right? Which is a lot of what you're talking about, Jared. Is it kind of helps you go through that process of defining what's the goal, discipleship, right? What does a disciple look like? There's a lot of content on that in Vitals as well, helping answer those questions for you, and just kind of walking you along through that process so you can either build a youth ministry according to Vitals, or you might have to restructure, which I think is a little bit of what you've been doing. Yeah. Caleb, is you've been like, okay, what are some events that I either need to refocus this event or towards this goal, this vital, or I need to add this event, or I need to get rid of this one. Yeah. Like talk to the youth pastors, Caleb, who are like, man, I gotta think through like some of what we do, and I gotta ask myself some tough questions, like, why do I do what I do? Is it just because it's what I inherited? It's the playbook we've always been running for years. Yeah. There's a lot of reasons this happens, right? And so if you're a youth pastor, you're a volunteer leader, and you're listening, and you're watching, please don't feel bad if you feel like that sense. Like there's a bunch of, some of you got into youth ministry.
I feel like that still.
Yeah, but like some of us came into youth ministry with like this, I'm called to do this and I'm going to go to school and study for it and train for it. And then others are like, I was just a volunteer who loved students, and then all of a sudden my church offered me a job, and I'm like, sure, why not? I just been kind of doing what we've always done, but now this conversations like this make me think differently about like, why do I do what I do? So what's that been like for you, Caleb? And what are any advice that you want to pass on to you pastors listening?
That's a great question. I mean, I would say like the biggest piece of advice, the thing that's been the most helpful for me is having people who can speak into my life, people who are older than me, who've been in youth ministry for years, who can say, hey, here's what's going on. That's why Vitals is so amazing, is because we just get wisdom from so many people who've been in this for so long, that can really speak to exactly what I'm walking through. Because again, 4 years in, I still feel like a total rookie, and there's still things I'm like, I'm still battling. So like the programmed versus discipleship, like strain I always will probably feel, or at least I still feel right now. I'm like, that hasn't gone away, but having people who can speak into my life, also having other youth pastors I can talk to is like another huge part of this. Cause it's a really lonely world as a youth pastor. And yet a lot of times you can feel like, am I just the worst? Like, am I terrible at this?
Yeah.
And it's, having perspective outside of yourself is super helpful. So that's like the broad stuff. As far as like the specifics, I think what Jared was saying about playing the long game, about it's, you can accomplish more. I don't know. I'm going to botch the quote here. I forget exactly. What was the quote you said? I'm not even going to attempt it.
Yeah. We overestimate what we can accomplish in the short term and underestimate what we can accomplish in the long term.
Yeah. Bingo. That was beautiful. That was great. That was so good right there.
No.
Yeah. I think that catching that mindset has been so helpful for the pressure I felt, because when I first came on, it was like, okay, here's all the things I want to do. And when they're not happening as fast as I want them to, it makes me instantly go to what's wrong with me.
Yeah.
Which is just a terrible way to think.
That's part of the challenge of discipleship though, right? It takes work. It's kind of messy.
Yeah.
It's long-term commitment.
Yeah.
And we want short-term gain. We want to see it, right away. And then when we don't see that fruit, it's like, what do I have to do? And again, that's why we can easily fall into the trap of event-based, program-based, attractional-based youth ministry, because we either see immediate results or we see what looks like immediate results, even though it might not, necessarily be that.
Yeah. Man, on top of that too, as you were just saying that, I was like, one of the best things I've ever done for myself is getting off of social media, which is like, how could you do that in youth ministry? But like not being able to look at other youth groups and what they're doing and how amazing and huge it is has been so instrumental to that long game perspective of I'm not doing a terrible job.
Yeah.
And I just got to keep going.
Yeah, the comparison will kill you.
Oh man, yeah. So that's a random other thing. We could do a whole episode on that.
So Jared, you do just you and I've been friends for a bit now, and but I know that part of your ministry and the role that you're serving right now is not just facilitating like events like we're talking about, but you do a lot of one-on-one coaching and you do a lot of cohort coaching with youth pastors in your network, both those that are vocational and even a lot of volunteers, because you guys actually do a lot of like planting of youth ministries in smaller churches. So you're having conversations, especially in those small churches, you're having conversations with volunteers that are just launching and starting a youth ministry from scratch in some cases. So you're having this kind of conversation with them a lot, right? How to structure and build things with discipleship being the main goal. Share some wisdom, coach those that are watching and those that are listening. What are just some real good practical first steps for someone who is either kind of starting youth ministry up and they're kind of trying to lay some structure and foundation in place, or maybe they're in an established youth ministry and they're trying to restructure some things around the goals of like discipleship and vitals and things like that?
Yeah, it's been amazing. It's probably the most enjoyable thing I get to do. Aaron, and you and I were part of starting a whole thing called Launch, which is about planting youth ministries. And we are on right now. We've got 3 that are happening, and this is number 16 in New York.
Wow.
Over the last 3 years,
so cool.
Which is pretty amazing. So, what I would say is 2 things and they're kind of interconnected. But right now, one of my convictions in youth ministry, but honestly, it's for the bigger church as well, is the best youth ministries, the most healthy youth ministries that I see are youth ministries where biblical community is at the center of that youth group.
Mm.
And so, and one of the ways that's helpful to kind of say, well, what does that mean? Is for the students that are in that youth ministry, that youth group is the social center of their world.
Mm.
And so I think there's a lot of youth groups where kids attend, but the social center of their life is their sports team, it's their the school friends, it's something else. The youth groups that are the most healthy are the ones that have created such a sense of community, which is community based around a shared mission. It's community based around a shared goal of Christ. But the kids that are part of that youth ministry really feel like this is our crew. This is the social center of my world. And so working towards saying, how do we create that and build that with the opportunities that I have? And for some people, maybe we can only meet once a week or once a month. Okay, well, in the time that you have, how do I work towards creating real deep biblical community? And the second piece, and this connected, because the only way they can have really deep biblical community and discipleship is by having loving adults who love Jesus and love students.
Yeah.
And so what I see as the biggest barrier for youth ministries, growth barrier, is that they love hanging out with students, and sometimes they're even good at discipling students, but they do not disciple adults well. Mm-hmm. And being in youth ministry, if you want to be a youth pastor, youth leader, you have to be able to disciple adults as much as you disciple students.
Yeah, that's true.
Because as your youth group grows, the lid on your youth group will be, do you have other disciple makers? Mm. Yeah. And they don't just come out of the woodwork. Like the best leaders are developed, not found. Mm. And so if your youth group all of a sudden goes from 5 to 15 and you're the only leader there, well, guess what? You're not discipling 15 people, or if you've got 2 good leaders and all of a sudden it jumps by, 10, 20, 30 students, which can happen. If you haven't spent a year developing great leaders, and now you're scrambling trying to find them, it's going to be a lid on your ability to disciple students. Yeah. So what I always would say is you are always recruiting and always discipling. And the bigger your youth ministry gets, the less you're going to spend time with students and the more you're going to spend time with adults. Mm. Because you have to replicate your disciple making abilities. And that only happens when loving adults are willing to pour into students.
That's so good. I love that. It's just good, real practical advice there. Let's highlight some different resources that can be helpful. So first, Jared, you have some incredible resources there that you are constantly developing, a podcast that you guys do that's talking about a lot of these issues. So where can people find you? Where can people find some of your resources there in the New York Ministry Network, and where do we get you at?
Yeah, thanks. Well, like you, I'm also personally off of all social media, and I would also endorse it. It's been amazing.
Yeah, for real.
But we do a podcast called Better Student Ministry, which historically there's tons of stuff on there. It's been really focused on youth ministry, but recently we've made a shift to start to really focus on next gen. So we have an episode coming out that's geared towards kids ministry. We'll be doing stuff on youth ministry, and you can find that on anywhere you can find podcasts, YouTube. We do video versions as well. So that's the best place. That's kind of where we put our content out. And then the stuff that Aaron, you and I did with Launch, I believe they can connect with you through Lead Generation website. All that's on there as well.
Yeah,
so.
Absolutely. On the Lead Generation website, you'll see Launch and you'll see Vitals. Launch is an incredible resource that Jared, you and I were able to partner together to do. That's also available for free. So thank God for lots of generous donors and givers that make all that possible, right? That's true for Vitals as well. But if you're listening to this, you're watching, and you're let's say that you just love students and you happen to be in a small church context and there is no youth ministry, or there's just a handful of kids and there's not much structure of a youth ministry, then Launch is a good place for you to start and work your way through some of that video content and the notes associated with it. If you are in maybe a bit more of an established youth ministry, that doesn't mean large, but established youth ministry, you are the youth leader, the youth pastor, then Vitals for Youth Ministry is a great resource, as well as Better Students Ministries that Jared's talking about. There's just some incredible stuff there for you. you mentioned, Jared, about like as youth leaders, we have to not just develop our skills to disciple students. We also have to disciple other adults so they become disciple makers themselves. And it just made me think there's one of the videos we have in the Vitals library is called Becoming a Disciple Making Leader. Yeah. And that's good, not just for us, but that's like, there's a lot of videos in the Vitals library that I would say, oh, you should play that for your youth leadership team. Okay? If you have a couple of youth leaders at your team, or even your student leaders, there's some great stuff in there for student leaders as well. So some great resources to point you to. Jared, so glad you joined us for our time together today. This has been really incredible. Caleb, any last minute thoughts or questions, or just something that's kind of, I got to say this real quick.
No, that's been awesome. And really, again, this is just a deep dive on the greater videos that are on Vitals. So if you're a youth pastor, don't sleep on those. Make sure to check those out. This has been awesome. I feel convicted after this thing, and I'm like,
that was the goal. We just wanted to get you convicted.
Yeah, no, I'm here because this is good for me. I'm like, not for you guys. No, but for real, it's this just gets me excited for all the other conversations we're gonna have. So drop a like, a follow, give us a review, because that just helps spread this to more youth pastors. Maybe send this to a youth pastor friend if you're listening now. Because we've really been listening to be really impactful.
Check out these resources at leadthegeneration.com. Jared, what's the website for your podcast or your videos?
Better Student Ministry.
Better Student Ministry. So check out both of those. Jared, thanks for joining us.
Thank you guys.
You're awesome. And the dog's still sleeping, so we're doing all right. So, hey, we'll see you on the next Vitals for Youth Ministry podcast. Thanks, friends.